Yeah, a bunch of people have asked me like, how do I watch
Oh,
it?
we're online.
We are?
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Hi there. My name is Nik Georgiev. I'm Antelope Audio's UK ambassador. I'm here today with Ricky Damian, who is a longtime friend of mine. We know with Ricky, we know each other for about 7 years now.
Time, yes.
And hey, hello. Hi there.
How you doing, man?
I'm
Thanks for
very well.
having
Yeah. Thanks for joining me for this live stream. And it's really funny actually because I already know that we live about 10 minutes uh,
That's funny.
far, like you literally 10 minutes by foot from me, but we can't actually see each other. We can't meet in person. But there you go. It's now 7 years that our paths keep crossing for various reasons. That's great. So for those of you who don't know Ricky, I will make a quick introduction. You probably already read, the blurb on the ad for this event. Ricky got a Grammy for recording Uptown Funk with Bruno Mars and Mark Ronson. But I mean, Ricky's been a complete, recording, mixing, and a production machine for the past years. He's worked with people like Miley Cyrus, Dua Lipa, Sampha, Georgia Smith, Major Lazer, ASAP Rocky, Lady Gaga, and the list goes on and goes on. And I don't know, maybe Ricky, you could say something about yourself. I don't know. I just think it's just normal to start with an introduction.
Cheers or something?
Oh,
Since,
Oh
so,
well,
you know, for
I wasn't thinking about it this way, but since you dragged me into this and you're drinking a beer, I thought it's what's like a job if you can't have a drink at work. So cheers, man. Uh, and hope for everyone out there is doing well and it's you guys are staying safe.
first comes first. That's the most important thing. Obviously, it's crazy times we're facing, and everybody is affected from this crazy scenario. And the music industry is very affected, and are home without a job. So you want to be a cheers to everyone. Hopefully, with technology and social media, we can all have fun at least and have a chat or something like that. I mean, I decided to cheers first because I'm Italian, so that's what we do. Uh, and I lived most of my life there. Right after high school, moved to London, where I'm still living. So for the last 7.5 years. So I have to say I've known you pretty much since I've been here, which is kind of crazy. We met at university, and then we just basically kept, doing stuff together, which is really good. I like collaboration. I like people getting together to make music. So I think this is definitely one of my strongest links here in London. And so I moved here to pursue a career in audio engineering. I started, playing in bands and playing music I started playing when I was 6. I started playing the guitar, as you can probably tell, and then started getting into playing with bands and kind of discover music production and recording at around age 13, 14, and started working in home studios and recording my band and having this utopic idea that you could make a record in a bedroom, but we can't. So started discovering this world at that age and started interning and working as an assistant at the local studios in my hometown Treviso, just in northeast Italy. Luckily, it's an area that is not super affected from this coronavirus, not as bad as central north Italy, but the situation over there is pretty crazy. So I'm sending love to all my friends and family over there. So I moved to London and studied here, and then soon after graduating from SAE, I started working with producer songwriter Mark Ronson, who I've been collaborating for the last maybe 6 years now, um, among other London-based artists and America. Spend a lot of time in the States as well, between LA and New York. So yeah, it's been a crazy journey, and I now I'm here locked in my house, which is sometimes I don't want this to be a happy statement, but in this pandemic and in this crazy situation, it's actually very beneficial for me to be home. I haven't been home for the past 4 years. It's been quite a crazy schedule, a lot of flights, a lot of intercontinental flights, working a lot in the States. So I haven't been home for the past 3-4 years. So it's actually okay to be home now for a bit. It's very good for my mental health. And luckily I moved to a new house at the beginning of March, and I was able to put a little studio, which is this room I'm here. So I have this little room now. Obviously, it's a very primordial at the time because then coronavirus happened. So I don't have acoustic treatment, I don't have proper furniture and stuff, but I have all my toys and the things I use recording from remote. Technology is really amazing nowadays, and it's helping a lot of people, get, if it makes sense. So yeah, this is me.
Well, there's a few things that I want to mention here. It's, first of all, it's actually, seeing that you're working from just a bedroom, basically, well, whatever it is, it's not your bedroom, but it's just a bedroom-sized room inside your home, and you've got like a pair of speakers, and I guess you just have some headphones just to, to check the mixes, and you still keep on working on some proper high-end productions even in this environment. And I think this is something that should basically give an example to everyone that at the end of the day it's a lot more about what you do with the tools that you have and the conditions that you are forced to work in, rather than it's of course that the gear and everything else helps, but it's a lot more about skills and knowing how to put into use anything that you have. And actually I remember when you started with Mark, and I think that if you hadn't done probably these studio internships before that, you probably wouldn't have been ready for that, I guess. I mean, I don't know. And
100%. I mean, my biggest luck, I have to say, is that I started so early, because at age 14 I was already playing around with like Cubase 3 or like Pro Tools 5, like very, very old softwares by now, but I was already trying to get things. And on top of that, also trying to approach analog consoles and analog tape. So I did start, getting familiar with this technology and with the actual skills needed to operate these things quite early. Mark loves tape, and a lot of his sound comes from that. And from the use of analog tape, the use of varied speed on tape machines to pitch things up and down, or to slower to then shift the formats and basically obtain a sharper or a fatter sound. So a lot of this knowledge that is actually sadly not taught at school anymore, because many studios can afford to have tape running, many people are not interested, so schools don't really teach these things anymore. So I was lucky enough to learn them on the field. And I mean, there's so many things that you can learn from books, from school, from actual theory, but then the real skills come from looking at professionals do their job. And my very first and foremost mentor, Andrea Valfre, the engineer of the studio where I used to assist in Italy, he taught me so much about mixing, about analog, about mic placement, about room acoustics. I can't even start. Every person that was a mentor for me or a teacher, the best thing I learned was to just watch them. Watch them from far or close, but without having any interaction. Just watch them do things, and it's a privilege to be able to do that. You pick up so many things, and also obviously by doing it yourself and kind of making mistakes. That's the other thing. That's if this can be an encouragement for this weird times we're living. It's like use this time, because this is free time in a way that we can use either to keep working. I mean, I didn't, I haven't stopped yet since from the team myself. I haven't really had a day off besides Easter, which is great. I'm lucky. I'm very thankful for this. Between mixing and remote recording, and then we can talk about later if needed. But if people find themselves locked at home with no work, this is a great time to expand your knowledge and your experience with softwares, with like anything really. Just getting to know your plugins better, getting to know your synth. If you have any hardware stuff like little toys like OP ones, keyboards, pedals, anything. Just taking the time that you wouldn't normally have because you're always in a rush to just sit down and be like, okay, what can I get out of this that I haven't discovered yet? There's so many amazing things that can be done, and I wish I had to work a little. I wish I could work a little less to do that myself, and I'll try and limit my workload a little bit, because it's true. It's very important. It's very, very important.
Absolutely, yeah. I've
Absolutely,
got here a
yeah.
really old guitar amp, which I keep on using, not because it sounds amazing, but because I know exactly how to get any kind of sound that I want from it. And it's just that I spend so much time with it that I don't need to think about it anymore. It's just something that you could just touch the knobs very briefly, and it's gonna get you exactly where you want to go. So yeah, that's I guess it's a very good advice. So before we started the live stream, obviously we had a conversation about your idea of what we want to do today, and you wanted to talk a little bit about the role of the recording engineer, and in a way you think that that's probably the role of the recording engineer nowadays is somewhat underrated. Obviously everybody has a little interface at home, has some kind of relatively cheap microphone, and in a way, from what I understand, I think that you've probably encountered many cases where people simply just have no idea how to behave in a recording situation. They don't know how to prepare themselves for a recording situation. And I think this is a good opportunity to talk about this because, we've all worked with different artists, but you have worked with some artists that, the demand for performance there is just at it's over 100%. You just need to be there, present all the time, ready for everything that they may throw at you, and so that's, I guess, something that we can start talking about first, and I think we can leave some time in the end for Q&A. I'm just sorry if I'm constantly looking down, but I'm trying to follow what's happening on YouTube and see if there's already any comments, and unfortunately there's some comments that actually the video is a bit slow, but I just have no way to improve this. Unfortunately, we're with fiber optic connection here, but it seems like that everyone's just watching something at the moment. It's 5 o'clock in the UK, and I think everyone's just finished work and they're just all on Netflix. So I'm really sorry about that. So we're going to leave the ciao Filippo, ciao. Yeah, there's a few people actually saying hi on YouTube. So we're gonna try to finish until about, you just keep going until about 6, and maybe then take some questions from whoever's out there. So yeah, what do you think about the role of the recording engineer? I mean, wait. So you yourself, actually, do you mostly record? From what I understand, you already mix quite a lot. You also produce. Maybe we can start with that first. And then there's another thing that you mentioned about recording to tape, and I'm actually curious to know how much of that do you have to do nowadays?
Yeah, for sure. So the reason why I think it's important to talk about recording, or first and foremost, I love recording. And if I had to choose between recording and mixing, recording is my favorite thing. Don't get me wrong, though. I love mixing. Mixing is fun. It's a trip. You can isolate yourself in this crazy world of music, and you can spend hours in front of the computer or the desk, whatever you're doing. I love it. But there is something about being in a room with other people and seeing the magic happen and being the person that captures that to me has no comparison in the other fields, and that's recording. And recording is kind of a, I say that it's like, it's just underestimated nowadays. I think a lot of people, obviously, we get, even on the web, on the streaming services, we see a lot of like mixing tutorials and sometimes mastering tutorials, but like mixing seminars and things like that, which is amazing because you get really to see what people do. But not a lot of people then are interested or focused about recording. But the reality is recording is the most important part, because garbage in, garbage out. If you have a terrible recording, you can just get a decent mix. If you have an amazing recording, you can get a ridiculously amazing mix. And that's the rule. That's how it is. Obviously, there's middle grounds, and it's not just black and white. But recording is so important. It's not just capturing the sound and using the tools technically, but it's a creative tool first and foremost. It's a creative role, 100%. The way you are capturing somebody just playing guitar and singing. You want to capture his emotional content, not just his waveforms, if it makes sense. So I really think it's an art, and it's important that people still not just learn how to do it, but like preserve the art of recording, because technology changes every day, and things have changed from like the beginning of recording music to now. It's completely different. There's been so many mediums, so many different formats for recording, but the art of recording needs to be kept alive, because it's like the soul to me. So I really like recording, and I do spend most of my time recording, or sometimes producing and recording, which is also very interesting, because you get to have you're covering both roles at the same time. But yeah, so I spend a lot of time recording, and I record bands as opposed to artists, like vocals, as opposed to like being in a room with somebody that can play a lot of different instruments. So you build a track instrument by instrument. There's all different scenarios to tape, to Pro Tools, with an analog desk, without an analog desk. It doesn't matter. Recording is still the same. The tools are just tools, as we said at the beginning of this. They're just they're just things that you can get. They're just in the way, if it makes sense. The way you use them is what is the difference. And so I mean, I guess we should talk about, I don't know, I mean, I could give a sort of like an idea, like a broad idea of what I think is important for recording sessions, or like how to approach recording in general. Because I think
keep going. Sorry.
Keep going. Yeah, I just there's so many things that you can learn from books, and they are the basics. They are like the bones of recording. Things like phase, things like mic positioning and stuff. But I think, especially nowadays where the budgets are really tight, and if you can afford to go to a studio where there's like beautiful gear or beautiful instruments and mics, and you have limited time, what are the most important things to do, how to prepare your session to achieve like maximum efficiency when you go there, and stuff like that. And also maybe how to be creative, because you always have to be creative. It can't be boring to just record. Some of the best things happen by mistakes, and that is really important. That I see that every day in my scenario and in everybody else's scenario.
Well, think about a funny story where something happened by mistake and you loved it so much that it ended up on a big record. Maybe you can get back to this.
I mean, it happens every day. Literally, I don't think I have one single example, but there's so many times. So the way I like to approach recording sessions is this: I come to the studio. Hopefully, sometimes I can the night before, sometimes the morning. This is when I'm the recording engineer. If I'm producing as well, depends. The situation might be different. But if I'm just recording, engineering, I'll come in as early as I can. Obviously, it's important to get to know, if you haven't been to that studio before, get to know what they have, so you don't have to like check lists and like dig in like mic drawers to know. Like, get to know what they have, get to know what you have to do as much as you can in advance from the artist or the producer. And then what I usually do, I get in and then I pretty much mic up or plug in everything I see, because I want to give the artist or the producer the creative freedom to just walk to something and be like, can I record this? And I'll be like, yes, 2 seconds, bam, ready to go. That is so important. Creativity is quick, and you don't want to lose the moment. You don't want to make anybody lose the momentum. So that is like my very first #1 rule. So if there is an analog desk, I would have, I go in the live room, there's a kit, there's a drum kit, there's a bunch of amps, piano, I don't know, maybe an organ or something. I would mic everything up with, like sometimes standard, sometimes I'll compromise given what they have. If I know I'm definitely going to be doing vocals, I wouldn't put the best mic they have for vocals on the kit, and vice versa. So I'll try and, have all the bases covered. And then in the control room, if there's like synths or like tape echoes, effects, multi-effects, I'll try and use the console as much as I can, because it's there, might as well use it, without making it too complicated. You never want to put the gear in the way of the creative flow. You just want it to put, you want it to be a catalyst. You don't want it to be an obstacle. So I would have everything kind of set up on Auxes or, on Pro Tools Sense, depending on what the studio is. I work a lot at Electric Lady Studios in New York, for example, and there the assistants do this, by default.
That's
They
their
just
life,
do this.
isn't it?
It make like and it's so good that there, even if somebody has to borrow a guitar amp or a microphone, they never leave the hall. They just put something else. If somebody needs the B15 from Studio A and Studio D, they would they would take it, but then there's already another bass amp ready to go. So it's really amazing how they run it over there. And I take inspiration from these scenarios and I try and apply it to whether it's Mark's studio in LA that I've been running for the last couple of years, or my this studio is all kind of wired up, ready to go. Every room I go, I try to make it like that because it's so important. It's the more you can be ready to record something straight away, the better. Which doesn't mean don't take the time to get sounds. That's the other thing. It's really important, but we'll get there in a second. So that's what I try and do, and then obviously that gets reflected in Pro Tools. So being Pro Tools the center of the universe of recording, I would have a pretty thorough template with everything color coded, named properly, grouped. So then whatever I'm working on, it could be a pre-existing session, it could be a new session. I always source from this template, and whatever the request is, it's like, yeah, ready to go, arm the track, ready to record. So that is the very first thing I do. Super important. Generally, I wouldn't set up to tape unless it's specifically asked. Mainly because when you want to use tape, and the way I use tape is a little bit more complicated in terms of, I'm talking about multi-track tape as well. If it's just a 2-track tape machine, which can be used for slap or just for running things, then I might just have it on a couple of tracks, on a couple of channels on the desk, or maybe on a couple of inserts on Pro Tools. But if you're talking about like multi-track tape, that would be different, and I would then set up the whole session differently. So that is very important for me. And then as a recording engineer, not only you have to be on top of your game and be ready in this situation, but you have to be like very, very present in the recording session. You always have to scan the room, understand what's going on. If there's people, sometimes you have the artist, some musicians, you have some writers, you have a producer. There's a lot of different people. Sometimes not. Sometimes it's just you and the artist. You're doing vocals. That's a different scenario. But sometimes you have a few different people. So not only you have to be ready to accommodate any request, but also to kind of predict what's happening. If you see that one writer and one artist are in the live room just jamming, just playing something, and you can predict that they will want to get it on their headphones to be able to track it, start recording already, arm all the tracks, start recording, start getting sounds to where they should be, and patch already the headphones. So by the time they raise their hand and go, can we record this? You're like, sure, ready to go. And now similarly on, other situation where you've just recorded a bunch of stuff and you see that the artist wants to jump on a different instrument that is not ready, try and predict it. Try and always be on top of it. If they're jamming, if they're trying to write something, just always hit record in a way that, even if it's a room mic or something, like whatever is the closest microphone, just sometimes it's important to capture the moment, because so many times it's been like, oh, that was amazing. Did anybody record it? And then you are the proof that, you documented that well. So all these things are very important. And I know it sounds like a lot of work, and it is a lot of work, but that's why I think it's underestimated, and it's kind of like, people don't think about it. There's so much that a recording engineer can do to improve a project. Also, there's so much that a recording engineer can do to deteriorate a project. I mean, don't get me wrong. Recording something, there's no such a thing as recording something wrong. Like, I mean, there is such a thing, and it's like getting phases wrong, over compressing, over equalizing something. That is going to be a headache for a mixing engineer. So that, I mean, we can talk about that, and it's it's settings don't mean anything, but for the specific scenario anyway. So my vocal settings for when I record vocals with Georgia Smith, as opposed to Yeba, as opposed to you name it, they don't matter in any scenario but that exact scenario. So we can talk about gear.
Yeah, absolutely.
Things
I'm
like
really
that.
shocked when people actually, specifically for compressors, when they go through the settings to find, and it's like, oh, let me load the vocal setting, or I mean, I suppose if it's a specific bit of device, like that specific device that you always use for tracking or something like that, you may have a specific preference, faster attack and medium release for vocals or something like that.
There's spots. There's definitely sweet spots. But actually, this reminds me of something. You were asking me about an episode where we did something by mistake, and it actually would be good. That like plugin presets is the perfect example. Like there's sometimes when I'm like when I mix personally, sometimes I get stuck. I mean, I guess everybody gets stuck, but I get stuck, or maybe I get bored of something, or there's a specific sound, like an instrument or a part that I just don't know what to do with it. And sometimes I would just take a plugin, or I would open the compressor that I have already on it, and just start going through presets and see if anything shows up that it's exciting. The amount of times that saved me on a mix, I can't even explain. It really works. Sometimes I wouldn't necessarily, sometimes I wouldn't, I'm mixing a drum kit, I wouldn't go preset drums. If I'm not even looking, I'm just flickering between things. And then at some point something super exciting happens and it's like, whoa, this is amazing. And so I end up using it. If I had to go back and look at what it was, that could be like, strings mellow, you know what I mean? Like so many of these things, or particular effect that I discovered by just doing this. Like there's and this is obviously me giving away this is no secret, but it's my personal vocal crazy stuff. On Crystallizer by Sound Toys, there's a preset that I swear to God I use in every mix, and it's a crazy long modulated reverb that you achieve by on the factory default pressing the left arrow twice, so you're going back 2 presets. I don't even know what it's called. I think it's called something like Space Washer or something like that. I've used that since I've discovered that, like last year. I've used it in every mix because I love it. But I would have never come across it if it wasn't just trying things. And that can work in the analog world as well. For example, you're recording one instrument. How about you listen to that instrument through a different mic? Or you have a vocal mic with a vocal chain, so EQ, preamp setting, compressor, everything, maybe reverb as well. How about using that vocal mic to do something else? Sometimes you just grab that mic because it's the closest one, you put it on a guitar amp, arm the track, open the channel, listen to it, and it's ridiculous. It might be the best thing or the worst thing you've ever heard. But sometimes these things are interesting to do.
I think I remember reading somewhere that the intro on Money for Nothing on Dire Straits, that typical guitar intro, was recorded by mistake. Actually, they had the mic just somewhere, just left in the live room, probably like pointing sideways or something like that, and they just liked the sound and they thought, well, let's just go for it. But one thing that I notice here is that even though you're going through the presets, it's not like that you are looking for. I mean, you said it could be soft strings preset that you're using on drums, and it's actually your ears that make the decision. So that justifies, I guess, the whole, everything that you just said there. It just makes perfect sense that way. So there's a few things that you touched on, actually. So there's a bunch of things. In fact, you were talking about preserving the art of recording, no matter how technology changes. And I think this is something we can get back to in a bit. The fact that, well, the recording technology has changed quite a lot. Of course, there's the advent of digital that's changed things a lot. But in terms of microphone technology, now I'm using a mic modeling mic here, right? So it's probably something new compared to like most of other things, but things have not changed that much. And yet now we're seeing some very interesting tools, for example, such that can do automatic mixing, for example, automatic equalization, or automatic compression, stuff like that. And although I don't think that these tools are going to replace the creativity of a human anytime soon, I think that there's another element that whole recording, art, that is not about how do you place a mic, which mic do you pick, which mic pre do you pick. It's a lot about how do you actually work with the people that are there, and how do you approach that from a psychological point of view. So maybe that's something we can get back to. I think it's probably quite strongly related also to what you were saying, that a big part of your job is to actually be able to predict what is going to happen there and not break that stream of creativity that as long as you know, the moment you say, oh, can we put that like 20 mics in front of the singer and now sing in every single microphone, and oh, can we change the mic pre now? I guess none of that happens, right? So I assume in Zelig here in London, when that used to be Mark's studio, but now in LA, everything's already mic'd up and it's just left as it is. And
most times there's also a different approach though, that sometimes I like to just strip everything away and then approach things one by one. I would change, mainly I set up everything as a not just as a matter of convenience, but also as a as I said, not to be so technology is not in the way, so people don't have to wait. Sometimes it's good to change though, because the other thing that I don't think is a good idea is to always have the same sounds. Like, of course, I would always, go for a 57 on the snare.
Always.
Because, well, most times, but or on a guitar amp, because that sometimes, it's also about not only predicting actions but predicting sounds. Like, that if you're going for a specific sound, most times you're not going to have the time to work on the sound too much. Let alone you're not going to have time to swap the mic unless it's broken. Sometimes people are demanding and you just have to go. So you have to know what you're doing. You have to know how that mic is going to sound like, where you're going to put it. So you have to know where to put it, how it's going to sound like, and pretty much how to EQ it, compress it if needed. So that is the real deal in terms of like the kind of recording sessions I do. Most times you get in the sounds before. Or sometimes you get the sounds while the artist is like noodling or like rehearsing a part or something like that. That's your window to get the sound. And you can always, the beautiful thing about technology nowadays is that you can always tweak it later. You can always EQ, compress, add effects. You can do all these things in the box, and it's so flexible. You could pretty much record it dry, like just the microphone into the preamp. But we all know that there is no such a thing as, if everything got replaced by digital, there's one thing that can't be replaced, which is a preamp and a microphone. That's it. Like that, there's digital microphones and stuff, but that only means that it's a analog microphone, like it's a capsule and a little preamp and then a converter in the actual microphone. There's no way to replace a preamp and a microphone. So the massive advantage that we have at using the gear, as opposed to processing it later, is to imprint and get a sound that then is already there, So by recording, and I promote a lot recording aggressively, which means, if you're confident, this requires a little bit of experience and a lot of mistakes made in the past so that you don't make them again. But if you can, just record the sound as close as you want it for the mix. If you're recording vocals, without overdoing, without like regretting doing this, because you want to be careful, especially if it's like a first take artist or something like that where you can't fuck up. EQ, compress, get your vocal to sound amazing. I mean, that's only going to make the singer sound better and sing better while they do it, as opposed to, like, it's easy to play safe, but it's also very important to know when you can to get the sounds that are needed. And that applies to anything, drums, especially drums. I mean, you want to get drums to sound as good as possible on the recording side, because I mean, there's comparisons and people can say that plugins are getting closer and closer to sound as similar as possible to the hardware, but I mean, there isn't. It's different to me. The way that a microphone preamp then feeds a bunch of compressors into Pro Tools, or tape and then Pro Tools, it's a different. Even tape, for example. I know I'm skipping a lot of things, but maybe my brain is faster than my mouth right now. But,
if I could ask you some questions to what you said, because what happens is that you say quite a lot of interesting things, and I actually want to focus on some of these, and just get a bit deeper into these subjects, and then maybe move on to the next thing. But okay, so kind of to recap, what you're saying there is that you need to be prepared and you need to watch, basically be attentive, pay attention to what's going on in the live room, in the control room, be able to predict what's going to be the next step so that you can prepare for that next step before you've actually before you have to move to that. And so that includes, from what I understand, is like preparing the tape machine, of course, calibration before the session if that's a tape machine that is used, setting up the desk, setting up the basic cue mix, doing all kinds of line checks, preparing your Pro Tools session and labeling the tracks, color coding them, maybe dropping markers if you know the structure of the song already, having a clear idea. I guess that's one thing that I personally always try to teach my students, is that ideally at the stage of recording you will have an idea about the final sound that you're going for, and this is where you will start shaping it, right? So I wonder, like, because you were just talking about recording vocals, and I wonder how often do you end up using EQs and compressors. Now I personally, so I can very well see what you're saying there, that nowadays we can process everything in the box at a later stage. It doesn't really have to be right there at the recording stage. But then there is this thing that actually, if the singer is singing with a sound that already sounds more like the sound in the mix, their performance will actually be into the gear that you are using. So how often does it happen that you can actually use you know, a compressor or an EQ? You've got a bit of time, maybe try 1 or 2 mics.
I try
and
all the time.
all right,
I try all
just
the
1
time,
second,
you
and
know.
just to make a
Sorry.
little plug here, just about something that, you know, I'm speaking right here into an Edge Duo mic, which is one of Antelope's modeling mics, and you know, a lot of people ask me about these mics all the time. Oh, but does it sound exactly like a 47? Does it sound exactly like a 67? And you know, I think that that's a little bit like, you know, in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's not the answer of the question. You have to get the question right, and that's not the right
Exactly.
question for me, because here's the thing. Maybe it doesn't sound exactly like the original mic, but that's not the point. The point is that in a work situation like what you're describing there, you could have these mics around the studio, and then when the singer comes in, you could say, right, here's a 67 for you, and you actually don't need to change the mic. And this is something that I found that helps a lot indeed to get that flow in the session a lot. So it's been very useful to me personally. But let's get back to what you were saying there about processing the vocal, and maybe if you can give me some examples. What would be a typical vocal chain? And if you're absolutely certain that, you know what, I have no way, I've never worked with this singer before, but I need to just mic it and start recording, what would be your go-to chain?
Sure. Well, let's start from a very important statement, in my opinion. I don't think there's even 2 47s that sound the same. You know what I mean? There's not 2 67s that sound the same. So when you say the question is wrong, that's 100% spot on. The question is not, is this the same as a 47, but does this serve the same purpose as a 47? Does this give me a similar result than a 47 would do?
Absolutely.
As an example. I've been working with this amazing artist, Yeba, from in New York at Electric Lady for the past year and a half, maybe almost 2 years now. And we've done all the vocals there. And in the house, they have 2 U47s, one of which really works on her vocals and is the one we use. It's called Thelma. It has a name because even their LA2As are named. So Thelma really works on her vocals. The other one that I can't remember the name doesn't work at all. And it's the same microphone with very similar parts. Obviously, you know, I haven't gone inside and checked that the tubes are exactly matched or anything. Theoretically, 2 47s. One really works and is on every vocal we've done besides a few other.
I actually, sorry, I was just checking if the live stream's going well, and it seems like it is. But which artist were you talking about?
Yeba.
Yeba. Okay.
This
yes.
An amazing singer from Memphis, Arkansas. She's also a great friend. She's amazing. But you know what I mean? Like, out of all chances, one of them really works, the other one doesn't. So there isn't such a thing as 2 mics that are the same. That's why I say the settings, the things basically only work for that specific scenario you're in. You know, every day is different. You know, I've seen mics that behave differently on a daily basis. You know, a mic that's great today that sounds a little brighter or duller the next day. I've seen that for compressors, especially tube stuff. They're like instruments. You know, things behave differently. So it doesn't matter. But in general, I try and have, especially when I do vocals, I try to have a definitely a tube mic paired with like a Neve preamp if I can, or a Neve-ish
So
preamp.
what, like a C12, 67, 47, that kind of stuff, Browners,
I always
whatever.
like 67 and 47s. I do like Sony C800s a lot as well.
Yeah.
They're very bright, but also kind of ready to mix. They sound kind of mixed already. So I'm a big fan of those. But vintage 87s are beautiful too. Obviously 67s, C12s, Telefunken 251s, old and new ones are really good. But then again, Flea microphones are beautiful. Flea are great. We have a Flea 47 at in Tyler. I work a lot at Mark's old studio in Tyler, who's now owned by Platoon. And we have a Flea, and it sounds great. My friend Tommaso Coliva bought a Flea a couple of years ago, and he was the first one I tried it from, and it sounds really, really good. So it's definitely not about the specific 47. It's about what that microphone does for you. So that's what I choose if I can in terms of microphones. But sometimes I use an SM7. Like I have one here, ready to go. It's easy. Put that through a preamp that can handle the impedance, or have a little impedance box that brings the impedance to a better level. That wasn't a really scientific phrase I just said, but
But I understood what you're saying there. Yeah.
Change the impedance to bring the level up, because otherwise you'll have to gain it a lot. Sometimes that works really, really well, and in fact, oftentimes I go for the SM7 with even with female vocals, very delicate performances. I can get away with that.
That's interesting,
so
actually, because it's a dynamic mic, and you wouldn't expect that that's what you would use for female vocals, but there you go. What about in terms of compression? Do you in EQ? Do you? I mean, high pass filter. I guess that's always in. Or
it's in, and if I have a Neve preamp, or like I have a BAE 1084 Avril. I have it in Los Angeles. So sadly now I can't use it. But there will, my filter will be engaged at 50 or whatever, the lowest frequency is. By default, I don't even need to think about it. I usually don't EQ before the compression. Unless I need to, but if I need to EQ, I think the microphone is not the perfect match. So I usually try to not to touch the Neve, which is, it's a channel strip, so it's inside, it's pre and EQ. Sometimes maybe if for example I'm in a room that is a little bit resonant, or I have weird resonance from a glass or something like that, obviously I will try to move the mic first. That's always the rule. Move the mics.
Absolutely. If there's a problem, address the source. Absolutely.
Address the source. Never try and compensate with EQ. It's just not going to sound good, and your phase is going to get completely destroyed. So move the mics, move the instruments, adjust the room. Room, microphone, and performance are the most important things. So you have to change those first. But sometimes you can't. Sometimes you're in a situation where you're live tracking, or there's limitations. You're doing a video shoot, you can't really move things around. So then I would do corrective EQ before compression, not a crazy amount. I'm not talking about like 3-4 dBs. I would just touch things, and maybe sometimes because it also depends a lot on the vocals. Like for example, Yaba, she has a very bright voice herself. I don't know why my computer is going crazy.
I can see you well, actually. It's okay. I can see you. I can hear you.
Cool. She has a very naturally bright vocal, so I don't really need to apply any brightening at all before or after the compression. Other singers will have a darker voice. Then I would try maybe to increase it a little bit before the compression with the the high band in the Neve. And then my compressor of choice usually is a TubeTech CL1B.
Oh, okay. I thought it was in level 76. Or
I mean, I basically used to use an 1176 all the time before having a CL1B.
Okay.
And I bought myself a CL1B as a birthday present 3 or 4 years ago. Made the investment, saved the money, and bought it. And I can't use anything else ever since. There will be times where I use an 1176 or like a retro or Gates, the stay level, for example. Sometimes I would use distressors. Distressors are really, really good on vocals as well. I love those compressors on everything together, but they really shine on vocals as well. Very underestimated.
So overall stuff that has, well, actually no, the TubeTech doesn't have such a fast attack, if I remember. That would be a bit slower. Yeah.
It's
It's an optical
compressor.
Yes, exactly.
So it's not the fastest, but I usually tend to, the crazy thing about the tube tech is that it's invisible. You can get even 6, 7, 10 dBs of compression. You're not hearing it. You're just hearing the good side of the compression. You're not hearing the bad side of the compression, which sometimes you can't do with the 1176. With 1176, once you're going too far with the compression, then you know that it just starts sounding, sometimes it's really
I've been
nice.
part of sessions where, the 76 will be doing like 15 dB of gain reduction on the vocals easily, and it's.
And it sounds
but
really
if you know
good,
what
right?
you're doing and if it's working well, then
like it sounds great on like raspy vocals or like rock, indie, alternative stuff. That's really nice. But when you're trying to get, the fullness and the richness of something, vocal performance, especially on female vocals, CL1B has no competitors in my opinion.
Well,
I mean, obviously that's my preference. Everybody has their own.
So, I'm actually completely with you on that. I personally like to process things to tape if I have got the time and I've got the right gear and all that. And, actually recently, I mean, I'll be absolutely honest with you, I was completely against the whole idea of processing with plugins on the way in. But actually, nowadays, I'm finding it that I'm using, either a Goliath or Ryan Studio Synergy Core. And I'm actually
100%.
using, the FPGA and DSP effects on the input quite often. And it seems like that this is a direction where, well, some of our competitors also really pushing that. And it's kind of like where things seem to be going, that a lot of people actually nowadays are used to use all these devices, but they don't necessarily have them with them for the session, so they're actually tracking with the emulations. And I see that you've got a Goliath behind you. Do you sometimes use the processing on that one?
100%. And that was literally my next point. After saying all this about gear and blah, 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 then the reality of it is in scenarios like this, where my tube tech and my BAE are in Los Angeles, locked in a studio, in our studio over there, here I replicate the same thing on this SM7. So the vocal chain I have here on the DSPs and FPGAs is the BAE, because there is a BAE emulation. I don't know if emulation is the right word. Pardon me if that's
it's
not
licensed, so it's.
I don't know if it's emulation. I don't know. I don't want to get technical. I have the BAE, and then in there I don't think there isn't a CL1B. So I think I use either the LA2A, which is
or a
somewhat
Fairchild inspired as well. Probably.
Actually, I've been using the Fairchild a lot. It sounds really good actually. Yeah. And the other thing I do, and I also do that in the analog domain, is usually to have a Pultec EQ on the output. So after the compressor. So that's where I would increase the brightness if I had to
tape
post
as well. Yeah.
Yeah, always to tape, always to tape. And so in this scenario, for example, I do it to tape as well, because I'm not doing it on the insert. I'm actually recording through it.
Yeah.
So I go from the preamp, from the Goliath preamp to the AFX, and then out of the AFX straight to Pro Tools. And similarly, I mean, I did like a bunch of remote vocal sessions the other day with Georgia Smith, and I know it's a competitor, but everybody's trying to do their own thing. She had an Apollo interface, and because I was controlling her computer, I was able to change, put the same thing, Neve and Tube Tech, and I was controlling it from here, and I was changing the settings.
Control session, yeah.
So we have this software, amazing software, Audio Movers, that allows this kind of like loop where I can send music, she sings to it, and then it comes all back, and then I don't just have to sync it to the session. So that is one thing that makes it possible. But then also me through like remote desktop, changing the gain of the mic, because I can change everything. So it's amazingly convenient to do things like that. Obviously the analog is better, but when I don't have the analog, I'll make it work. That's the whole point of this, I guess, of this conversation. It's not the exact piece of gear, it's how you use it, And again, we can expand that also to maybe, we were discussing at the beginning, like listening in this situation. Like I'm mixing in an untreated room with not, I have hung blankets and stuff that I'm not showing because they look absolutely terrible.
As long as you don't have egg crates, then you're okay. Yeah.
I don't have those. Waiting for the actual. I'm working on the acoustic design, but it's for bigger reasons like coronavirus. I can't get anything done. So I've hung duvets and blankets and things to make it work. But then, knowing your speakers really well and being able to listen through your speakers as opposed to listening at the speakers is the solution. So I use the speakers. I have a pair of Sennheiser HD600s here that I reference a lot with. I have there's this other plugin called, let me tell you, because this is amazing. I wish I had discovered it before. It's called Audreo, and it's like an app on your phone and a plugin on Pro Tools that streams from your mix bus straight to your phone.
Oh.
So you can play back the mix in real time on your phone and kind of listen how it sounds there. Or I, for example, use my Bose Bluetooth headphones in conjunction with my phone to like check with
So
those.
yeah, lots of different. Yeah.
Extremely important, and it's important to use all these tools to just, it might take a little longer to mix in here. Yes, it's frustrating. It's taking me way longer to mix a song. But then again, it doesn't matter the exact gear. All it matters is you being able to, use it and make the music go through the gear and, use it to achieve a certain goal. I think, that's the art of recording. I can get this vocal to sound good with an SM7 straight to the pre and use the plugins, or I can use a very posh, expensive chain, and it doesn't matter. It's not gonna make the performance worse. It can be.
Can you perhaps take me through a session of, I don't know, Gaga or whatever, Georgia Smith, whatever, I don't know, whichever one you pick. I mean, it doesn't have to be a specific singer, but I just wonder what's the usual approach to that. I mean, I guess it's probably different for everybody, but do you usually go through, like, do you do like whole takes and then you repair stuff, or is it like loop recording until you get the perfect take? Or, I mean, is there anything specific that maybe you've noticed about the way you should prepare the Q mix so that that helps the artists a lot as well? I mean, obviously, again, I guess it's reverb and echo on top of the processing, but just anything you can share about that.
I think, every singer is so different. There's basically a dedicated approach to everyone, and on top of that, depending on what we're trying to get, if it's a harmony stack or something, everybody works differently, and I work differently according to what they're doing. Usually I have my template, which is I have a tracking vocal, a tracking track, which is where my, it's my main input. It's where I have the microphone comes into that, and then that's where I playlist everything basically. So every take of that, it doesn't matter if it's a lead, if it's a a background, if it's a harmony, they're all like playlisted on that track. And then under that, I will have maybe, I don't know, 8 to 16, multiple of 8s tracks called vocal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever. And then when I know that we're starting, for example, to do harmonies, then as soon as I know that I have a part a take that was fine, I will just drag it down. So I start stacking them, we start hearing them. And I would obviously have Q mixes. Most times you have personal mixers, which are really nice, either analog or digital. Digital sounds a little worse and there's latency involved, but I try to give the artist a little bit of freedom. So they have the music, the track, they have themselves dry, and then the reverb.
Yeah, that saves a lot of time from all of that stuff. Can I have a little bit more reverb, a little bit more vocal? That's always a good way to approach it. Yeah.
Mentioning that sometimes that's actually counterproductive, because some singers would go as far as getting a terrible mix and sometimes sing worse. I've seen at points I realized that takes were getting worse and worse, and then I was like, is everything okay with your Q mix? And then I go and listen, and like there's so much reverb that your perception of pitch is
also listening levels, sometimes they can change your perception of pitch as well. So
so as an engineer, that's the other thing. Your role is to be able to anticipate these kind of things and make the artist comfortable. Also, suggesting like, hey, by the way, if you have the confidence with the artist, if it's a strong working relationship, you can say, I think you're a bit pitchy, maybe bring your reverb down. Or is reverb affecting, do you feel this, blah, blah, blah. Always be, you have to be careful, because you're talking about somebody's gift, singing. It's so personal that you're not going to say, by the way, you were so flat on that take, you can't say.
Well, if you feel Spectre, you can pull out a gun, I guess, and that changes everything. I think with this lockdown, soon both of our hairs are going to look like Phil Spector.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean, I don't look like anything like the picture that they put on the thing. That's weird.
Well, I mean, let's see.
But
I think we're gonna be for at least 4 more weeks like that. So I'm planning to grow mine and see what happens.
probably when I reach
Yeah,
here,
yeah.
my girlfriend asked me to if I wanted to do it like a complete shave, and I said I'm not brave enough to do this. I've never done it in my life, so I don't think I will. Or maybe not, or maybe I will. I don't know.
So
We'll see.
actually, I mean, yeah, okay. That's an interesting thing to hear. You know, the way that you organize your Pro Tools workflow when you're tracking vocals. That was actually something interesting. So you have a single track. Basically, you just don't bother duplicating it. Don't bother like doing any of that. You just keep. I'm just repeating that because I thought that was an interesting, tip there, that you always record on the same track. You just create new playlists and keep on adding new playlists. But then maybe you do a quick comp, or you just really like a take, and then you just copy that on the track that you created before that below, and that way you can layer them, because obviously sometimes, especially if you're doing harmonies, you want to hear what you had there before.
100%. So actually, it's worth mentioning that I separate lead tracking from background and harmony tracking. So lead tracking, obviously I playlist everything, but then I don't need to drag anything down. Everything is in that track, and then I do a comp, and that's it. Then later on, I would probably spread out verses and choruses. So I would put choruses on separate tracks so you can adjust reverbs and levels separately. But that's just post. That's literally when we're done. So my leads will be like, or sometimes I do lead verses, and there's a track that has all the lead verses, lead choruses, lead pre-choruses. So I would end up with maybe 3 tracks like that. Then when we're doing harmonies or stacks or ad-libs or anything like that, then I have a tracking vocal and then a bunch of tracks down that I drag. But that way is so quick, because all those tracks go to a bus that then doesn't feed the like the vocal cue mix. It feeds the mix, it feeds the song. So the singer doesn't hear those vocals as loud as herself. That's very important as well. You want to keep any other pre-recorded vocal way lower, because otherwise it can throw singers off, or it can be intimidating. Sometimes it can be too loud, because one thing is hearing yourself loud when you sing, when you are actually singing at the same time. One thing is to listening back to your own voice super loud like that. You want to make sure that you don't do that to singers, because they hate it, and for good reasons. So yeah, I'll have this kind of distinction, and then basically all the stacks end up on a bus that I can add compression, I can add effects, EQ, and the latency is not going to affect the tracking track, because the tracking track is separate. Doesn't go anywhere else but to the output that goes then to the cue mix. And the other thing I like to do, this might be a little unorthodox, because a lot of people obviously do headphones from Pro Tools and use Pro Tools Sans pre-fader and things like that.
I do this sometimes. Yeah.
I actually hate it for the simple reason that, because I can't hear it unless I have a station with me, I know I'm going to forget something. I know I'm going to think that I'm muting something, and therefore the artist is not going to hear it, and then they're going to hear it because it's pre-fader. So I don't do that at all. What I do is, hopefully, if this only works if you have a summon mixer or a desk, or like an analog desk. I would have so if my personal mixer for headphones is 8-channel, let's say it's 8-channel for simplicity. Obviously 7 and 8 will be click and talk back. So those come from a different place. Click will be out the last output. But then I would have on the desk the same breakdown that I give to the artist. 4 is blank, 5 and 6 is the reverb, because it's stereo. And so I actually feed the cue mix returns, because that way every level of adjustment I do in Pro Tools, with the harmonies up and down, I change the level of the bass or something. I don't need, when I'm tracking vocal, I don't need to change things for me and not for the artist. If I'm doing any volume change besides the lead vocal, I'm doing it for the artist as well. So they hear what I hear, or I hear what they hear, if it makes sense. So then if I need to hear more of her, more of the reverb, more of the track, I can do it on my little 6 faders here, but that doesn't affect her. But I know that if I mute something, if I change a level in Pro Tools, if I pan something, it will replicate in the cue mix. That's the quickest way
Yeah,
I've
okay.
found to do.
This makes a lot of sense. I mean, because it's a very simple workflow, and I guess a lot of what you're describing there already is about being quick and keeping things simple. But I guess the reason why you're saying this is unorthodox is because I think most places, at least in the UK, I've never done education in another country really, but here usually what's like the standard that everyone follows really is that they have to be, all your sends will be pre-fader basically, so that they're independent from what you do. But, that's, there's no right or wrong way as long as it works and it does the job and it's the most convenient thing in that situation. But that was an interesting one for me personally. I never thought about that this way.
Well, that's the other thing. I try and approach it as, okay, let's pretend Pro Tools is let's say Pro Tools is a tape machine. I can't touch the levels inside. How am I going to feed headphones and how am I going to monitor this? That's how I do it. And I know that when I'm recording vocals, I would have done already all the tweaks and the movements in the Pro Tools session that are ready for the singer to sing on top of the track. Like I don't need to move, I don't need to solo things while I'm recording vocals. If I need to solo anything, is the lead vocal, because I don't know, was there a rattle or something? Is there something wrong with the mic? Whatever, then I can solo it on the desk, but that's fine. That's not going to affect anybody, Again, feed to the reverb is done internally in Pro Tools as well, so the reverb is not going to cut. Everything is not going to. The headphones are fine, whatever I do in the desk. If I do anything on Pro Tools, of course, but then if I need to solo something on Pro Tools while I'm recording vocals, there's something bigger going on. There's something wrong.
Yeah.
So I found out of experience, I just found that's the best way for me to do it, because also I can go back to it anytime, and I can, if the next thing I'm recording, this is another thing I like to do. So when I set up the room, I'll have the cue mixers, and let's assume that we're recording one instrument at a time. I will label them all the same. So 1 and 2 is track, 3 is U, just says U, so it doesn't say vocal guitar, it says U, and then 5 and 6 says effects or reverb or whatever. So which means if I'm then recording acoustic guitar next, I don't need to change anything physically on the patch bay. I don't need to change anything on the desk. The only thing I have to change is that on Pro Tools I reroute the vocal tracking back to output 1 and 2, for example, and then I go to the acoustic guitar track and I route it to 3, and that way I'm ready to record,
That's
acoustic guitar. I don't have to think that, oh, do I need to do copy to send because I changed some levels? Do I need to unmute and mute stuff that is pre-fader and I'm not listening? Like, to me, it's a no-brainer. And it hasn't failed yet. There hasn't been a situation where I felt limited by it. And it's basically it's sort of like a tracking cue mix template, if it makes sense. Like, I know 1 and 2 is always the track, 3 is you, is the artist. Obviously, if you start recording more than a person at a time, that it changes. Yeah. But then I'm going to deal with it. And what happens when I do that? 3 is one person, 4 is the other person, 5 is the other person, 6 is the other person.
And in terms of effects, I guess it's mostly reverb, or do you sometimes add also echoes or something else?
I don't put echoes by as a creative choice myself. I know it can throw singers off. I usually start with a nice lush Valhalla vintage verb, like a whole reverb, something dark, something not too characterful.
Not too much sibilance, you mean?
No, yeah. I always low pass reverbs, pretty drastically actually, like 3-4K, sometimes even 1K.
Okay.
Depends, obviously. I'm just throwing numbers right now. Okay. But I mean, the 80s have now long gone.
Yeah,
and I don't think it's
nice.
I love the 80s, don't get me wrong. I don't know why my email keeps popping up and splitting the screen with...
I can tell you that I'm not seeing any of that, and so that should be alright.
I'm just gonna... Yeah, it's just weird. No, I as much as I love the 80s, and the 80s are very trendy now, like you hear Linn drums everywhere, you hear gated reverbs everywhere, 808s everywhere, and Juno pads, I have a Juno 106 right here. So I love all that, but there's one thing that I don't really like, which is this super bright reverbs. when you hear all the sibilants and like and these kind of things.
And
so yeah, I always filter them.
what about, I mean, because, well, that's at least what I promised to some of the people that ask about what we're going to do today. And I told them that we will talk a little bit about, you know, what we just spoke about, the whole recording process and vocal recording, but also a bit of drum recording. And I just want to say it's like 6:10. I don't think there's a big issue if we run this for a bit longer than what we planned to be.
We can go as much as you want.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about drums, because you know yourself that's
It's my favorite thing, man.
thing as well. And you know, like, there's so much space for experimentation there. And you know, just let's talk a little bit about recording drums in general, and then maybe if you could get me through. I mean, I guess someone might be interested. Maybe you could get me through the setup that you had on Uptown Funk for the drum kit. By the way, I listened to that and I thought that there's quite a bit of room sound there. I might be completely wrong, but I thought I was hearing some room sound even on the kick drum. But yeah, back to you.
I will explain that. I'll get to that. But then, I mean, drums is the best thing. It's the most satisfactory thing to record, in my opinion. It's also, it can be the worst thing to do, because if you get a bad drummer and a bad drum kit, you are like, you're crying. It's literally, you can't fix it. You know what I mean? There's no to fix it. And also, there's nothing like a bad, when you get the phases wrong and you have when you're a mixer and you get a badly recorded drum kit, it's just so frustrating, because it will take a lot of effort to fix it.
Sample replacement.
I just mixed the project where I don't know what was happening, but the engineer basically recorded the toms with the gates. Like, that's the number one do not do in recording, which is record with the gates. He had the gates on the toms, and obviously set wrong. So I had all these tom tracks with, like, you know, sharp cuts on the sustain, so I couldn't whatever.
I don't even talk. But yeah, that's another.
Never mind. That's they're thinking it's a mental disease or something. But yeah, drums is glorious. I love doing it. I love, you know, and I love every bit of it. I love doing big sounding drums on big rooms with like stone walls or like bricks or like high ceilings, as much as I love doing dead drums. The level of satisfaction is the same. Obviously, when you can like crunch things up and compress, in general, compression is always good. Distortion is always good, and I do a lot of that because I find it fun.
So you're professional
but yeah,
distorter.
I love it. Exactly. I'm a professional distorter and compressor. But yeah, I mean, it's very similarly to vocal. There's no thing you do the same twice, unless you're doing the same song and the same drummer and the same drum kit and the same room. There's obviously, you know, things that really work, like the 57 on the snare, like having, you know, a RE20 or a 421 or a D112 or a D12 on the kick, like things like that. Generally, what I like to do if I'm in a studio that I don't know, or if I'm a studio that is not mine or the people I work with, again, I would get to know the room. Definitely ask the assistant, where's the spot? Like, where's the drum spot in this room? That you have a resource right there, which is the assistant, who's hopefully been around for long enough to have seen so many records being done.
Keen, aren't they? At this stage of your career, you're super keen.
I mean, if you're not keen at that stage of your career, you don't want to do this.
Yeah, just give up.
I don't think you should do this. If you're, I mean, I understand there could be anything going on, and I'm not trying to make a point, but you gotta be super keen at that point. At any point. Otherwise, you don't love this job anymore. Which is the only reason to do this job. Because why would you be an engineer? Why would you do this if it wasn't for the love of it? For the love of music? It doesn't make sense. Being in a room with no windows for days, no. But so you would ask the assistant, you'll be like, where do you usually do drums in this room? What room mics do you usually use? What works? Tell me what works. You want to know. You know, obviously you're gonna then listen you have to listen to it for yourself. But you know, if you can get a head start and start putting things where they're supposed to sound good. You know, example, in February I started recording this album of this amazing artist called Chiminio. He's a ridiculously talented drummer that has triggers on every bit of the kit. and all those triggers go to Ableton and Max MSP, and he actually, everything triggers like a musical sequence. So he plays a whole song with like bass, keys, vocals, everything is triggered, but not like play, stop. You know, every word of the lyrics is triggered by a hit. I know it sounds really messy, but it's actually crazy complicated.
It
So we went to
sounds very
Conk
complicated to me.
It's very complicated, but it's genius. And I'm in the process now of mixing it. And so it's super fun. But we went to Conk Studios in Hornsey.
Yeah, next
And,
door.
you know, it's legendary. Next door, exactly. I mean, I used to live just, 5-10 minutes cycling.
I don't think we said that, but we are both in London at the moment.
Yeah.
Whoever's listening out there.
Yeah. Was it? No, it's not raining for once. I've never seen London so sunny in my whole life.
When you're locked in, it would be the sunniest.
Yeah, unbelievable. So we went there, and it's, you know, amazing studio. We went through tape as well, which is very important. There's a beautiful Neve 80 series that we used. I used every channel of. I put ridiculous amount of mics because I wanted to have a lot of options. But the first thing I did was to ask the assistant, where is the spot, you know? And he illustrated me that there's a few spots. There's like a livelier spot, there's a more dead spot, there's a compromise. So we ended up putting the drums in the sort of in the dead spot, whereas where the ceiling is lower and the carpet is on the floor, but then opening up the rest of the room, and we have all the room mics. So, you know, that is something I like to do, to just, you know, use the room a lot, because that for drums you can't not use the room unless you're going for super dead.
Well,
sounds.
You know that I go inside caves and places like that to get good drum sounds, because I'm just a believer that, I mean, even if it's a dead room, it has to be a relatively big dead room.
Or not a room that sucks sound out, if it makes sense. That's the thing. For example, our live room at Zelig here in London at Tileyard had no reverberation whatsoever. Like, you couldn't, if you had a room mic, it wouldn't sound any good. It would just sound phasey and like slappy. But then the room itself had all the frequency, had all the good frequency in it. It wasn't too dead. You know, it had a good height and good size and good absorption, whereby you wouldn't get reverb. You wouldn't feel that a microphone sounded far away, but everything sounded tight and had low end. There wasn't any lack of low end, any, you know, like node or end node in the room. It was really, really tight. And that's, by the way, where we did the drums of Uptown Funk, which, funny enough, I didn't get to record the actual acoustic drums.
Okay.
The acoustic drums were done the day before my first day of work.
Oh, wow. Okay. So wait, you went there, and on your first day of work, you actually had to get into recording Uptown Funk.
Yeah. That's tape. Yeah. Because that's what I was gonna get to. I mean, that was my trial. I wasn't even hired at that point.
That's a trial to, you know. I think that anyone who can go through this trial should be all right to get the gig, you know.
Well, I mean, it was a crazy situation. It was Mark Ronson, Jeff Basker. The very first day. No, I mean, I probably came in a day before or another day to do to like look at the studio and like, you know, like get a sense of cables, microphones, and stuff like that. But not really so much, because I think Mark was away at the time. So then one of my first days, I can't remember if it was the first day or the second day, but that was that session, you know, with Mark and Jeff. And we were recording guitars and then working on the drum sound, and that was all to tape. But the desk had no meters because they were out for maintenance, so I couldn't see anything coming in or out. I had no idea. You know, I was an
console you're talking about.
MCI 500, yeah. So that plus some of the lines were like mispatched. The Studer A800 and the Scully 280 that we had, both tape machines, were kind of misaligned and not really. It was a bit tricky to get done, but, you know, I made it happen, and I guess that's what gave me the job for sure, because it was a tech nightmare from a tech point of view. But regardless, what was I gonna say? Oh yeah, so a lot of the drums for Uptown Funk, they were recorded the day before, I think, or a couple days before. So I didn't actually get to see that. But it was a pretty standard. It was the same kit that we still have, which is a vintage Ludwig. It's like a Blue Oyster Pearl Ludwig. I think, if I remember correctly, because the mics were still on the kit when I started working there, 421 on the kick, 57 on the snare, 421s on the toms, and then what we usually do, which is we have a beautiful pair of RCA 77s, ribbon microphones, lovely, sweet, and we use them. We have one mono at the top, which is like sort of like maybe 1.5 meters above the snare, or between the snare and the hat, so it actually captures the solid beat part of it. It doesn't really pick up much of the toms or the right hand side cymbals, but that's not an issue because we would have spots maybe for hi-hat to ride. We're definitely going for a tight sound at that point. So, and by the way, we do this a lot, like this kind of technique, we use it a lot with Mark.
So ribbon mic, that's above the snare, so to speak.
Yeah, and then we have one that is at the bottom, like maybe 40 centimeters from the ground, pointing between the kick and the snare.
Okay. Oh, so it's looking
so we
at
call
the
that
beater, basically.
Not really, because it's not pointing at the beater. It's like if the snare is here and the kick is here, it's like looking between them.
Yeah.
Really got anything. It's just grabbing the air that is moving around there, and the two together is what we call the breakbeat sound, because those two together, and maybe, I mean, those two together theoretically, and most times it's like that, provided they're ribbons and they get a very good amount of compression and EQ, especially with Pultex and probably DBX 160s. That's what we use. They just sound like a breakbeat kit. You know, they sound like a record, like a sample from a vinyl. Most times we only need those two. So that's what would have happened at the time. But then we did so much work on top of that to make that sound what it is, including layering a variety of samples from the Lindrum drum machine, the actual Lindrum. So we had a Lindrum, and so on the Lindrum you can trigger the samples with external triggers. So I sent from Pro Tools out to the Lindrum, and so I sent the snare to trigger the Lindrum snare and the Lindrum claps, and then the kick to trigger the kick. So we had those three lines going on, and while we were printing, Mark was like, adjusting the like the pitch. You can adjust the pitch, and you can adjust the decay of
so you're sort of
of
performing during the print.
So in fact, if you listen to Uptown Funk, you can hear the claps every 4. They go.
Yeah.
Pitch of the Lindrum on top of something else that I'll get to. But there was that kind of performance happening. Then on top of that, once we printed them to Pro Tools, we had them go. Well, we started layering a bunch of like old effects. So we had an AMS RMX 16, which is the reverb you hear on the kick and some of the claps. So that classic non-linear, weird 80s sort of sound that you hear. We had that a bit on the kick drum and a little bit on the claps. Then we had I think we had a bit of an H3000. I can't remember the preset though at this time. But yeah, we had a bit of Eventide H3000, amazing multi-effect. And then we had an Eventide H910, which is very famous, crazy unit because it's crazy. Like, I don't think you're not allowed to use it for something like a slap delay. That would be ridiculous. Get Echo Boy or get whatever. But if you have to use it to get that crazy waterfall of pitch. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but it was actually widely used in the 80s from, what's his name? Tony Platt used that a lot, actually, to fatten snares or to create like a hi-hat delays and stuff like that. But you can basically pitch your repetitions. So that effect as well was done by using that, because if you move, there's this parameter called, I think it's called manual, and it's basically the pitch of the repetition, and by moving it while the song plays, you can vary there's like a little sequence of repetitions, very short, one after the other, like. So by pitching it down, you kind of create like a little slide.
It's a very 80s thing, actually.
Very 80s, yeah. But it's a song that is quite 70s, actually. So it's the two things together work really well. On top of that, we decided to take all this basically drum layering, so not the actual kit. The kit was already recorded to tape. The Scully was nice and crunchy. So all the processing, we decided to bring it to print it to the tape, to the Studer A800, and to use the vari-speed of that to actually make them fatter, which means we set the machine to be one I think we did a tone actually, to be one tone faster. So we would play back the whole song and the claps separate to the tape machine, while the tape machine was, correct me if I'm wrong, no, is that what we did? I can't remember which one of the two, but we basically recorded it at a different pitch, because then when we played it back, everything, the formats of everything were brought down.
So, yeah, okay, so you did a trick where basically you used the tape to pitch down everything by a semitone, probably, or a whole tone, but the duration of it was, so maybe you stretched it first in the digital, like in Pro Tools, and then you bounced it at a wrong speed, and then you put it back or something like that.
I mean, this is, and I usually remember everything I do.
And it's what, 6 years,
it's been
something like that.
Yeah. What I would have done maybe.
But it's interesting, you know, the tape would not give. Well, I mean, it will create also lots of harmonics for these, you know, pitch down drums, and that's very interesting.
No, amazing. And again, the same day we did the opposite for the guitar sound. So the guitar sound, we actually, this is what we did, and I remember it better with guitar because it was easier. So we printed the song a few times on the tape, regular speed, no vari-speed. So we printed a 2-track, 3-4 times. I think we had, we had 30 minutes because we were recording at 15 inches per second. So 3-4 times, and then we vari-speed the tape to be a semitone lower. So then Mark recorded guitar while listening to this vari-speed. So we were recording on tape the guitars. We had a DI and a guitar amps line, 57 probably, a 57 and a 121 sung together from a Fender Vibrolux and a Strat.
I remember that amp there, actually. We had a jam there. And yeah, I remember the amp, but anyway, yeah.
That amp is amazing. It's amazing, and we still have it. And so by playing, obviously you have to adjust your part, so you're playing one whole tone lower. And so by playing it there, and then bringing everything back to normal speed and retransferring it back to Pro Tools, you're pitching it up, so you bring the formats up. You're not changing the pitch because you actually played it lower. So you are actually back in the right key, but then your formats will be up, so the guitar will be way sharper and way like edgier. And that, we're not inventing anything here. People used to do that back in the day.
Les Paul will be happy about that.
Exactly. We're just, it's a tribute. It's definitely a tribute. I mean, Prince used to do that all the time. So many people. And yeah, so that's what we did. We used, that was a whole day spent on, going back and forth between tape. I don't know why my computer is saying low battery because, I know why.
Oh, you didn't switch on the power supply?
No, it's because I have this new computer with USB-C, and now there's a point of connection. You can break the connection on the transformer side. Boring stuff. Never mind. It's fine now. So yeah, a lot of tape. There's been situations also, much later on, a couple months ago, where again we went back to this. We use this vari-speed trick a lot, but we've done this even with whole songs. Like we've recorded a song at a certain speed and key, and then we decided that this actually, pretty much like the Beatles, when sometimes things are like sped up, like the whole thing, we just moved everything up.
Where was the sped up?
Things like that. And sometimes it just takes that little effort of hearing it a little slower, a little faster. You're like, oh, this sounds so different. I'm not a believer of the whole theory that 432 and all this kind of. Let's not. But sometimes you heard this song for so long at a specific key and BPM, and then you change it, and then the whole thing feels different.
No, but that makes a lot of sense. That's a very different thing from the whole let's tune to 432 whatever, something like that.
I don't have time for that. I don't have time. That's the thing. But yeah, like tape is fun in these kind of scenarios. It's really, obviously you can do this on Pro Tools. Pro Tools has vari-speed algorithm with elastic audio, and I'm sure other DAWs will do the same. I know Ableton can, but There's
I
no such
very
thing as tape.
often pitch down, actually in Pro Tools, I would pitch down the whole room, the room mics by an octave or so sometimes, and blend that a bit with, you know,
Yeah.
with the original drums, like
Really?
process it or something, you know, just smash it.
I mean, what are you gonna
Well,
do?
what else would you do
So
with the room mics of a drum kit? You just smash that. That's the purpose of these mics, right?
I had this very glorious moment at Conk Studios again, the recording I was talking about earlier, because they had a pair of Pi compressors. If anybody is a fan of compressors, we're talking about, you know, there's the Fairchild and the Pi compressor. It's like it's up there.
Yeah, but
We're
they're so different, man. And actually, the Pi on drums is just.
I think the Pi is the best thing I've ever.
So good on drums. It's just ridiculous.
Opinion, and I like wild stuff. Pi compressors and the Blue 1176, like the original Blue one.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything that can beat that kind of stuff. Like, and obviously it's so rare to find. It's so rare to find, both of them, very rare to find. But so they had these two Pis, and I could not use them. So you know, again, I had a bunch of stuff because I wanted to have flexibility. So I had two pairs of overheads, one pair of Coles 4038s, just standard.
It seems like they use this quite a lot, actually.
Well,
ribbons like 4038s, but ribbons in general,
yeah.
4038s. I think I've seen a lot of.
I much only do ribbons on overheads,
really?
because most times drummers play cymbals too loud, and you know, condensers are not forgiving enough. You know, if you have a very nice balanced drummer,
very good drummer, yeah.
And sometimes you have great drummers. Don't get me wrong, but then maybe they play the cymbals a little too hot because they're excited or something like that, and it's way more forgiving and easier to brighten up without getting this.
Okay, I have a question for you then there, like particularly for those ribbons and like basically the Uptown setup or the one that you're talking about now with the 4038s. And by the way, you know, the mic that I'm talking into, you know, that can emulate the 4038 actually pretty well, and I've been using it a lot as like room mics and, you know, stuff like that. But my question here is because obviously the 4038s or any ribbon generally, unless it's some modern ribbon that is designed to be this way, but they will be quite dark in the top end. So, but they will have a very thick low end, and this is one thing that because they're figure of 8 mics, you know, they suffer the most from the proximity effect. And, you know, that would mean that if you're quite close to the drums, they're going to sound really beefy, like really massive low end. But then, you know, if you're far away with a condenser figure of 8, it can be absolutely horrendous. Like you're left without any low end. Although that could work as overheads, because maybe that's the way you approach the overheads. Maybe you are going to be high passing them anyway in the mix. But I wonder, do you high pass these guys, or do you use the full sound of them, including the low end with some EQ and stuff like that?
If the room is not too reverberant, I'm definitely going to use them for the body, because as you said, you get a lot of that. And then you can, you know, if you then EQ them like with a Pultec EQ or something, you have a very sweet top end that is not going to be harsh, it's going to be nasty. Why is this email keep? Oh, let me. Sorry.
No worries.
I don't know why it keeps opening. There you go. It's very sweet, you know, the way you can actually make them brighter, but then bringing back that, you know, sort of smooth top end. But I try and use them for the snare mainly, not for the kick, because I feel like the only way to have a solid kick is to make sure that you get the kick out of everything else. If you want a very punchy in the face kick drum, you know, if you want a little bit of a more roomy kick, then whatever, by all means. But if you're trying to get a tight sound and a tight kick, then you have to high pass that part on the overhead. But for the snare, I really like the sound that you can get from ribbons on overheads, and so I try and preserve it if I can. You know, I would try and have some of the body around 200, like around that area. I would try and preserve it if I can, and the toms especially. There's nothing like the beautiful contribution that the overheads give for the toms.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Yeah, the toms. When you're that far from the toms, but you've got a ribbon mic that is. What I was saying is that, you know, a condenser would sound actually very skinny if it's a figure of 8 condenser.
Yeah.
But the ribbon still sounds, you know, quite thick, and the toms just, I mean, good overhead mics and the toms, the way the toms sound is just, I don't know. I often, even the close mics that I put on the toms, you know, they're often quite far from the actual tom. I mean, obviously it depends on a lot of factors, but
100%, 100%. And so, but going back to this example, so that my first pair was the Coles. My second overhead pair, which is very posh, was a pair of U47's Tube, in sort of a Glyn Johns configuration, but a little variable, because I had one at the top as it's supposed to be, and obviously I made sure that it was lined up with my two Coles, so in phase with the Coles.
Yeah.
And the other one, if I'm the drummer, the other one is actually here. So it's on my shoulder.
Behind the shoulder. Yeah.
The shoulder. And so those two, which were like looking at the kit, sort of like this, were running through the desk, obviously for the Neve preamps, and then through the pies. And I was smashing them quite hard, quite heavy. And so I've mixed 3 songs already for this project. I haven't even for 1 minute kept the calls on. The calls were muted all the time. Never, I don't need them. You know, like those. In fairness, I don't need even most of the spot mics. It's crazy. Those 2 mics with the right position, the right room. Tim Chiminio is a really balanced drummer as well, so he's got a great sound and a great kit. I almost get away with, you know, those 2 and the kick drum. That's it. That's all I need. And also we were going through tape, so they got crunched up even more.
So, well, okay. I wanted to try to give some. I mean, the way I wanted to keep this conversation in a way is that, you know, you're in this room right there and you're mixing some, you know, serious projects even in this situation. And I was trying to give the impression that there's a lot of stuff that you can do no matter what kind of tools you have. But I've got to say, drums are one of those things that actually, you know, if I think this is something worth mentioning. Is probably, it's been repeated many times, but I mean, depending on how much experience you've got with this, I mean, if you're a very experienced engineer, that's nothing new to you. But for those who are not so experienced with drums, I guess it's important to say that a good room and a good drummer. Well, let's start a good drummer. Maybe, at least in my opinion, you know, a good drummer, a good drum kit, and a good room. I think of them as the source, as one thing really. And then is actually the decisions of the engineer, and only then comes the gear. So, you know, the mics, and then the mic pre's and the converters, and if you're using some kind of processing, you know, all of that matters. But I guess really it's I mean, look, you can see on YouTube videos of someone playing outside on buckets, and they're a super good drummer, and they can deliver an awesome beat even on non-drums practically, you know, something that is meant to be drums, but it's just rubbish, but it still sounds awesome. So that's, you know, a really important thing. I think drums are, well, I guess that's one of the reasons why you like recording, and I like recording drums so much, is that they're so difficult, because if you don't have all of these factors, you have to have very good skills, and yet you could still suffer, basically.
I mean, the amount of frustration, sometimes you know, you can do so much, but if the drummer and the kit are not good, you're not gonna. It's the same as recording and mixing. If the recording is not good, you can have the best gear and the best skills. It's not gonna help. You know, it has to be good from the source. And even as far as saying that it so much depends on the drummer, because like the best example is my guitar teacher from Italy, Steve. He's, you know, a great friend of mine, and he could make the cheapest guitar and the cheapest amp sound completely badass, and it was all his fingers. You know, it doesn't matter. And then I would try that guitar. Well, I wouldn't, because I'm lefty, but you know, anybody else would try the guitar and it would sound crap. But then everything changed when he was playing it, because the skills were in the fingers. So you can even go as far as saying, obviously, you know, with extremes, like a terrible room is a terrible room. You're not gonna get. You can only get creative with a terrible room. You can only make it sound crazy or very wrong to the point that it becomes right. If it
sounds
sense.
Cool.
It sounds cool, exactly. But that's the thing. It all goes down to the performer at the end of the day, and then the instrument, and then the room, and then we come in place. So we are basically, you know, working, trying not to screw up. That's the number one job of an engineer, is not screw up. And then if you can enhance that and you can build on top of that, then fair enough. But drums is fun. It's the most frustrating, but also the best thing to do. It's nothing like the satisfaction of a great punchy drum kit coming through the speakers. And obviously there's a lot to take into account, like phase relationship between the mics is everything. Frequency balance and balance, like volume balance between all the mics is everything. There's so much more that you can do with just faders than actually using EQs to like craft sounds. Like you can get an amazing drum balance just with faders without even starting to touch the EQ first and foremost.
Can I ask you a question about that actually? So does it? So there's a few things actually here. One is more mixing related. I know that we're meant to speak more about recording, but I guess that matters because it's something that you either do in the recording stage or you do it in the mixing stage. Do you often? So the way I do this, I rather than nudge the tracks in Pro Tools or the DAW that I'm using, I use a delay plugin. So I don't know, the time adjuster in Pro Tools, or what was it, the one in Logic, sample delay, I think it was called. Yeah. And ideally I would actually have the delay assigned to a controller and a fader that I can move up and down, and actually down would be negative delay, up will be positive delay. And I would sort of listen. Actually, I wouldn't look with my eyes where the transients match, because what can happen is that maybe you align the kick drums to the kick to the overheads, but then the spill of that mic will be out of phase. So really my personal philosophy here is to listen. So I wonder if you do some of that time alignment in the mixing stage, or here's the question related to recording. When you record, and particularly drums, at least the way I do it, I guess if you have a similar approach, is I wouldn't, let's say that I start with the overheads. Let's just say that I would start with the most important microphones, yeah? So if I think that there's the overheads or the kick or the snare, that's the first mics that I'm going to try to make sound good and place them and all of that. But when I get these right, I then go to the next more important one and I bring it up, but I don't mute the first ones. I can solo it just so I can hear it, but actually I don't mute them. I keep on adding the other elements to the previous one down without keeping the new ones in solo, but rather putting them on top of the previous one just to see how they actually mix then and there during the recording stage.
100%. And this you can apply this thing actually to the whole mixing, and I think that is one of the biggest lessons I've ever learned, to the point that when I mix now, and obviously you're taught and you kind of like logically start with drums and then go all the way down, so drums and then bass and then in a general arrangement, guitars, keys, and then vocals at the end. I don't do that anymore because of this. I usually would, first of all, don't mute anything. Like I will have to listen to, actually not true, I have to say the first few hours I spend on the mix, and I try and do it on a different day, maybe a day before when I do the prep, then I would actually listen to everything solo. But this is only to spot anything that might be wrong. So, solo the overhead, see if the kick and the snare are in the center.
Yeah,
if not,
just levels, maybe a little bit for stereo mics. Yeah.
Listen to the kick. Is there anything sticking out? Is there noise? Does it need gating? I clean up the toms, get rid of the spill that I don't need. I do the edits. Same thing for bass guitars. I try and high pass, low pass, where I think, obviously, you would not want to go too far, because then you haven't listened to them against anything else, so you don't know if you need that bit of information or not. But I would get rid of hum, noise, hiss, denoise, anything,
work, basically.
All the technical stuff. And that's really kind of the only time I listen to solo at the beginning. When I actually start mixing, I think, again, overheads are my first thing. Even when I record, my track 1 and 2 on the desk is overheads first, and then kick, snare, and everything. I do first the overheads, then the spots, then the rooms, because everything can sound great. Then you bring the overheads. If the overheads, destroy the whole phase relationship and the whole mix, you have a bigger problem than you think. So because in order, you're not just going to flip the phase of the overheads. It's the relationship between the overheads and everything else. You know, you might have the snare being in phase with the overheads, but the bleed of the kick in the snare is not in phase with the kick. But then the kick is out of phase. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
it's worth starting with the overheads, 100%. What was the question?
Well,
I think I lost that.
That was the question about the soloing and also the time adjustment. You know, the offset between the different tracks.
Yeah. So I would do a little bit. I tend not to alter the actual original phase relationship between things unless it's wrong. But I do see a lot of time that I do it just mainly kick in and kick out, or snare top or snare bottom. That is in order to achieve a little bit more fatness, or sometimes to get rid of resonances. It's worth trying to nudge something instead of pulling out the EQ, because you know, also sometimes resonances, they're not really static, they're dynamic. So sometimes they only happen in the loud parts, sometimes they only happen in the soft parts, it depends. So when you actually nudge something, you are fixing the phase, as opposed to using an EQ that can only work, you know, in a certain part as opposed to the other. But the whole picture thing is, I really hardly ever solo stuff, to the point that, you know, sometimes I solo things like, I would solo the kick and the bass, or sometimes the vocals and the guitars, or sometimes the vocals.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I basically don't mix vocals last anymore. I mix vocals right after drums.
Interesting. I think, you know, that's particularly with pop tracks. I think it's really important. Well, at least I remember when I was less experienced, very often my mixes will end up either too bright or too bassy, and actually using reference tracks and getting the brightness right on the vocals can be an extremely good reference for everything else in that mix, because if you make that vocal sound the way you want it, now your drums have to work with the vocals, now everything else has to work with the vocals, and it's a really good reference. You know what, I mean I've got like a ton of other questions actually, and we can talk for a really long time, but it's already 1 hour and 45 minutes that we've been talking, and I can see that there's a few questions here. Maybe we should have a look at what's happening on YouTube and answer some of the questions. I don't know if there's many of them, but perhaps we... Okay, someone is shouting 57. No, okay.
I knew it, but don't be picky.
And well, you know what we should do? You should definitely try the Antelope Verge mics. So all the modeling mics, I'm gonna send you as soon as this lockdown is over. I'm gonna send you a bunch of mics to try out. But actually, the pencil mics, I urge you to try these mics on toms, because they just destroy the 41s. You know, they're like small diaphragm condensers, but they're made for close miking. They're really good for drums. I absolutely love them on toms. I can tell you they're just wonderful on toms. My go-to mics, in fact, I'd say for that. So okay, they were asking about the software that you're using to stream on your phone.
So maybe is there any way to write it? No, I guess no. It's this software over here.
Oh wait, okay, somebody replied actually. Audio Movers, that's the one that you were talking about.
It was not.
Okay, awesome. So we've got that one answered. Can you explain a little bit more about the Q-Mix?
Software. This is the software you want to use for your phone. There you go. And that's my dad sending me a picture. Sorry.
So they were asking a little bit more about the Q-Mix, but I'm not sure, Robstar, if you could specify that a little bit more, exactly.
So the cues.
Yeah, I assume that's what they're asking. And then there's another question: did you sing the tape with Sampha? That's another question that they asked. So it's about the Q-Mix a bit more, and about the tape, the way you synced.
I'll do the tape first, which is quicker. Yes. Well, no. During Uptown Funk, we didn't have Sampha. We didn't have the facilities to do it. So no. The way I would do it, I would have 4 clicks at the beginning, 4 clicks at the end. Sync the click at the beginning, check that the end is right. usually is right. If it's not right, I can time stretch. It's so little you don't hear the difference, as long as you X4. Normally, if I'm doing a process where I have something already on Pro Tools and I need to go to tape and back, I would rather skip the process of going to tape, work on it, and then come back. I would rather do everything in a single pass, which is the only way to avoid tape drag and therefore stretching. So I would send stuff from Pro Tools to tape, and then while I send it to while I play back and therefore sending stuff to tape, I'm already re-recording it back to Pro Tools. Because that way I know the drag, so this, you know, you get a delay if you record out of the repro head because there's a delay between the record head and the repro head. There's not going to be drag in the tape because when you rewind and then play back, the tape is going to drag, and then you're going to get like a discontinuous playback. So it will vary. The delay between your Pro Tools and your tape is not going to be consistent. Whereas if you record to tape and then back at the same time in one single pass, you're going to be 100% sure that the only offset you have is the delay between the record head and the repro head. So all you need to do at the end of your pass is to take the tape tracks and nudge them back by a calculated samples amount, which, you know, depends on your tape speed and all these kind of things. But that's how I do it. So in a scenario where I'm recording drums, for example, from scratch, nothing pre-recorded, I go to the desk, and then from the desk I go both to Pro Tools and to the tape machine at the same time. So I split the outputs of the desk, and then from the tape machine to Pro Tools. So on Pro Tools I have a set of digital tracks and a set of tape tracks, and they are recording at the same time. I'm obviously only listening to the Pro Tools ones because if I listen to these there will be delay, but doing this way, obviously tape is always running and is always on repro, so I'm actually getting the sound of the tape. This way I'm recording both things at the same time, and there's not going to be any drag whatsoever, and I kind of skip the way of needing SMPTE, if it makes sense. In a situations where it was a little bit more intricate and I had to have Pro Tools and tape running, like just playing back at the same time, then I would use SMPTE with link synchronizers. But it's not like I'm lazy, but I like to do things more efficiently if I can. If I can save some time for myself and for the artist, then I would do it, and that proves to be the best thing for me. So that's it in terms of tape. In terms of Q-Mix, so this is what I do. Assuming you have a multi-track, in this case, a multi-track device, so a DAW with multiple inputs, so more than 2 converters, that's all I'm saying. So you can have 8, you can have 16, and as long as you have a mixing desk that has 8, 16, 24 inputs, or even a summing mixer that has all these inputs, you can do cues in this way. You can't do it if you're only using Pro Tools output 1 and 2. In that situation, you need to create a second pair of outputs for the headphones, and that way you're going to have to use the controls in Pro Tools or Logic or whatever. But in a situation where you can spread your outputs on a console, I send the whole track, music and drums and everything, out of output 1 and 2. I send the person I'm recording, so whether it's vocals, guitar, drums, it applies to anything, to output 3 if it's mono, or 3 and 4 if it's stereo. So if I'm recording drums goes out 3 and 4. Everything else goes out of 1 and 2. So that is the talent. 3 and 4 is always the talent. And then 5 and 6 is the effects if I'm only recording one person, or it will be another person, or whatever, you know, whatever I need. Sometimes I don't even need to use it. So that way, I am actually sending these things from Pro Tools to different outputs. So all my music will be assigned to 1 and 2. All my vocals, my tracking vocal, the vocal I'm recording, will be going out of 3. And then I would send reverb from that track in Pro Tools to an aux in Pro Tools with the reverb, and that goes out of 5 and 6. So physically from the Pro Tools outputs, from the converter outputs, I patch straight to the Q mixer. And obviously Pro Tools outputs are normal to the monitor section of the desk, so they also show up on my desk. So I have 1 and 2 up, 3 is the vocals, 5 and 6 is the reverb, and then on the Q mix, 1 and 2 is the vocals, 1 and 2 is the track, 3 is the vocals, 5 and 6 is the reverb. Then talkback and click are separate. So that way, every change I make in Pro Tools get reflected on both my console and the Q mixer, but every change I make, every change that I need to make while recording vocals, which is either bringing vocals up or down, more reverb, less reverb, music, less music. For me, I do it independently, and the artist can do it independently on the Q mix. I hope that's a little bit more clear. I
I
understand that
think
wasn't
that
maybe
was
the.
quite elaborate, and there's actually a few other questions. So I'm looking down because I'm checking my phone, and just reading through the questions that we've got. So I'm gonna go through. I'm gonna go back to YouTube. I'm just getting now into the questions that are on Facebook at the moment. So okay, there's a okay. That's about Italian food. So I'm going to skip this one.
Probably know who this person is if I read.
Davi Parolin, or maybe.
Oh, yeah, I know who
Okay.
the guy is.
So Leo is asking a question about: do you have any tips for recording acoustic guitar when the room isn't best? Mic types, placement, treatment in Pro Tools, etc.
Well, funny enough, if the room is not good at all, you might want to go for dynamic mics. And I know, on paper you shouldn't record an acoustic instrument like that with dynamic mics. However, I had amazing results. But the good trick to me is to, dynamic mics are not just dull and insensitive, if it makes sense. Dynamic mics sometimes have such strong character that they really bring a crazy vibe to the recording. And also, let's remember that ribbon mics are dynamic mics anyway. So ribbon mics on acoustic guitars work much better. Sometimes if you're doing strumming and stuff, I use ribbons a lot on acoustic guitars. For the same reason I use them on drums, you can brighten them up way nicer than if you have an overly saturated condenser, you know what I mean? So ribbons for sure, they solve the issue. Also, with the only disadvantage of them being figure of eight. So if the room is quite reverberant, you might have to, either do the old, Cole's trick and put a pad at the back to sort of make them a bit cardioid, or position them in a way. I think also it's very important to maybe, if you really if you can't do anything else to the room, try and move things around. Bring, again, a duvet or a blanket. Bring a chair. Bring a couch. Try and find a corner. Try and maybe sort of like cover a corner with things, so it sounds a little bit more absorbed. The sound is a little bit more absorbed or scattered, so it doesn't resonate, if it makes sense. But I think dynamic mics are probably the best thing to do, and maybe get them really close.
Well, this is actually, it's not so uncommon to track guitars with a MD421, at least. I mean, I have done it only once, so it's not like that I do it all the time, but I know a lot of people who had done it in the past. And just to give a little tip on that, if you ever get to use ribbons for the way Ricky was describing it, you should also think about the geometry of your room, because the whole thing, I mean, obviously there are some ribbon mics that are not figure of eight, like, I don't know, the M60 or something like that. But that's achieved by adding a second diaphragm. Like, naturally, ribbon mics will be figure of eight, which means if you think about the mic, if this is the front and the back of the mic, and you're picking up what's in the front, what's in the back, but not really around, which means if I'm pointing at the screen, I'm now sort of rejecting the ceiling, the floor, the left and the right wall, and I'm looking to the front and to the back. Now, if you've got a long room that it's narrow, you might actually think about aiming it at the length of the room, or, I mean, it depends if it's too long and you have a slapback, but I guess that's not going to be the case. But
if there's a big problem.
That's a very different situation there. But what I mean is, try thinking about the polar pattern that you're using. And if there's some specific reflections, I don't know, you've got a glass on the side or something like that, that for some reason is not making things great, think about where's the no point of that polar pattern, and try to actually use that to do the rejection. And the other thing about, this kind of approach, because that's valid, a lot of people would put some kind of sound barrier at the back of the figure of eight, of the ribbon, right? And that way, minimize a lot what the ribbon mic will pick from the back, which would be the room sound. But be careful, because if you place that close to a large surface, there will be no low end at all, because the way these mics work is that you have to have a difference between the front and the back of the diaphragm in order to have any pickup. So if you place it right next to a wall, you will get a high pass filtering effect. which probably with guitar won't happen. But you know, if you put something right behind the mic. And Ricky, maybe where would you put that mic? Like, would it be like a standard thing, like around the 12th fret, or something else?
I usually do the 12th fret. I usually do the 12th fret because it seems to be the most, you know, like it's the most versatile. Obviously, you know, it's so much dependent on the part. If it's strumming, if it's finger picking, if it's soft, if it's loud, so much dependent on that. The other thing that I was gonna say, obviously, maybe it's more on the processing side. If you have a room that resonates a lot and you're trying to record anything acoustic in that room, make sure you get a really good gain stage happening, but that by default always anyway, and try not to compress too much, because as soon as you're going to compress a lot, even with vocals, you will hear the room show up, and with the rooms come out the resonances, the holes in the frequency response, you're going to have a lot of issues. So it's very important to get the gain staging and your levels right. So for example, let's say you're recording a vocal in a pre-recorded track, try and maybe get the sound or the way you're playing or everything together to sit in the mix that you have already without having to add too much compression. You know, in a way, kind of like make it sound already that it fits the song without having to compress too much. Because as soon as you're going to start over compressing, or even just a bit compressing that signal, you're going to get quite a lot of room coming up. So that's the other thing I would suggest. And I know there's like Isotope does like a D-reverb that can take the reverb off. I've never tried things like that. I'm sure they really work, and I'm a big fan of Isotope stuff. But
that's good for dialogue and like post-production, for film stuff and things like that. Really.
I wouldn't do it on music, exactly.
We've got another question here. So okay, there's a question if you are going to go to Abbey Road Institute Amsterdam.
Sure. I can't now, but one day.
Maybe in the future. It's actually. It's fun.
Love to.
Yeah. Then there is another question. Hi, Riccardo. What career advice would you give to a young, aspiring sound technician in this historical period? Will studies be? I guess that's studios. What he meant to say. Will studios still be willing to accept assistants?
I get this one a lot. And it's a tough one. It's a tough one because studios are stagnant in a way. There's not a lot of change in, staff in studios anymore, and studios are less and less. Sadly we see studios close down so often.
We'll probably see a lot of studios closing down because of this lockdown.
Angel closed. What, 4 months ago. Beautiful recording space in London. Sadly. And it seems like Mono Valley is going as well, or it's being sold. So, sadly, we see a lot of places. Places have been closing down forever, but, they keep closing down. So I think if you're approaching this career from an engineering point of view, because obviously if you're approaching this as a, production as well, the best, suggestion I can give you is produce. Find an artist you really believe in, and then put all your efforts to make that the best thing you can, and then move on. Next artist, get a sound, find your sound, find your skills, find the things that you can do really well, but also find the things that you don't do really well. So you make your work go towards the things that you like and that make you feel good, because it has to be also about feeling good, especially when you're creative. From an engineering point of view, I think the best thing you can do now is to find work with an artist or with a producer. So becoming the engineer of an artist or the engineer of a producer, because the chances of a studio hiring you as a, when a studio hires you, it will hire you as the bottom of the chain. So it will start from running, which means you're not allowed in the control rooms. You're not allowed to work on music. Basically, you're just there to do housekeeping and maybe session setup.
And tea.
And cleaning.
I said tea, but they might ask you to clean as well, yeah.
Cleaning and tea, yeah. Which, by the way, when I started out, before starting working for Mark, I had done a few experiences with like Red Bull Studios and a few. I was so eager that I was totally down to do whatever. Like for me, the attitude was, it doesn't matter what I'm doing, as long as I'm in a building where they're making music, I'm fine. So I think that is also a very big important part of this, is the attitude, is the motivation, is to be like, what's the difference between you and the other 300 people that want to apply to that job? Is that you have more passion than anybody else. I think that's, the most important thing. that is what the individual can contribute to the situation. Nothing else can compare to that. But for studios, that's how it is. And then, you know, slowly you're gonna then progress and become an assistant and become an engineer, and then eventually, you know, maybe go on your own. Whereas if you start working with an artist or with a producer, then you're guaranteed to be hands-on on something, you know, straight away. It doesn't need to be the biggest artist or the biggest producer, but it's something. You know, you're right on from day one on the project. Obviously, this doesn't mean that everybody that comes out of school or comes out of a course isn't a fully formed engineer. I wasn't a fully formed engineer when I started working for Mark, but I have to say I had the skills and the experience that allowed me to perform right on the job, you know. And by fully formed engineer, I mean what you achieve by tens of years of experience, you know, like where you are later on in your career.
You know, back in the day when I was at this stage and I was looking for some kind of internships, and I actually remember an advice. I can't remember who gave that advice, but it was by a, you know, big name professional engineer. And what she said is the really important thing is that when you are there, when the chance comes, you need to be prepared. You should be ready for it, because the chance will come once, and then you will have the opportunity to be the recording engineer instead of the assistant or something like that. That's where you need to be ready, and you should be prepared already.
I mean, luck is where opportunity meets
luck
preparation.
As well.
So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, basically. A bit of that as well, if you could, you know, have some luck, that will help. There is another question.
You know,
can you repeat the two mic placement for drums again? One between the kick drum and snare, and where was the other? That was above the snare drum, right? Maybe just...
One is at the top as a mono overhead, so where you would normally place a mono overhead, but above the snare and the hat, pretty much. So it covers the important movements of the drums. And the other one is at the bottom, sort of like this far from the wall. So, sorry, this far from the floor. So like 30, 40 centimeters. I mean, even that much is okay. This is 25. So, and it kind of faces, it doesn't point at the drums. It points, it's parallel to the wall, to the floor. I don't know why I keep, never mind. It's kind of parallel to the floor. So it's pointing that way. But that here you have the kick and here you have the snare, basically here. So it's capturing the air that is moving around there. And you might have to adjust, you know, no kit is the same, no mics is the same. We did it with 77s. We've done it with Royer 121s, and they don't react the same way. So you need to adjust. You need to find the pocket of air, you know. There's a beautiful book called, I think, Mixing with Your Mind. I can't remember the amazing engineer.
It was something with his surname. It's a really good book. Although the whole chapter on digital audio is a little bit incorrect, but the rest is really, really good. Yeah, I agree.
He talks a lot about the flame of the sound, you know, the fact that every source has a flame, and the flames, you know, the sound develops through space, and where you put the mic is you have to go and chase the tip of the flame. So where all your high end, mid band, and low end kind of all phase together and lock in. I mean, it's quite conceptual at this point to discuss this without proper drawing or something, but that's what this technique is about. It's about trying to find the flame, which means finding the piece of air where all these elements are contributing positively, if it makes sense.
Absolutely. Can I actually ask you something? I mean, I assume that if it's just you in the studio and you are the engineer and there's no assistant or there's no like someone else, that's probably not going to be possible. But say that you have this opportunity, do you find yourself, I mean, at least for me personally, that's the best way to place a microphone, is either to have these headphones on that provide a lot of insulation and I can actually hold the mic in my hand and move it around, but that only works for things like acoustic guitar, and you know, it doesn't really work for drums. But
you can do it quite sources,
but if it's a really loud sound source, you're hearing it through the headphones, so you're not really hearing what the mic's giving you. But the thing is that actually a microphone will always change the sound that it picks up, no matter how accurate that mic is. And I personally find it is a really good way to find a good spot for a microphone is to have my assistant to hold the mic. So that's actually one of the reasons why I really don't like that whole thing about the mic cable being wrapped around the stand before you've actually decided where that mic is really gonna be. and just have the assistant to hold the mic in their hand and move it around, and she or he just moves it during while the drummer or whoever is playing, and then I'll be listening to that through the speakers. I don't know if you have the luxury for something like that, but do you sometimes do something like this?
I mean, most times I have assistants, and usually very skilled ones, which I'm so grateful of all the time. Especially the guys at Electric Lady. They're my favorite people. They're my favorite people on earth. I love each and every single one.
I'm joking. Yeah. So tell me about
that. So I'm lucky that and oftentimes we do this, and it's a lot of back and forth. I tend to do this before. I mean, I play most instruments anyway, so I tend to maybe do this before the artist or the producer show up when we do the setup. So we would, sound check things and, get it in the ballpark. I am actually, at some point in my life, I'm going to get one of those like mic stand robot. I think there's things that you can move the XYZ sort of, you have a joystick that is like forward, back, sides, and then and height. I tried it once and I was like in love with it, but I've never had one. It's like, my first mentor, Andrea, used to dream about the studio where every mic stand was a robot, even from the ceiling. Yeah. So you could just have this massive console that like stupid stuff. But actually it would be nice to do it, because but then at the same time you're like wasting time because you're spending so much time going there, fine, perfect, whatever. Sometimes you have to just trust your instincts, and sometimes all the time, the time you're given to do this is the time to know that mic is going to sound good there. You don't have time to move it, so better learn where the mic sounds good before your sessions, if it makes sense.
Okay, we need to wrap it up, but there's just a couple of more questions, I think. So, hi Ricky, that's from Joseph. Hi Nikki, how do you handle projects with huge playlist counts and stay focused?
It's a lot of mental skills, especially when I start album projects or soundtrack project. It could be anything. At the beginning, in the writing process, you have to be so organized to keep everything together, from a labeling point of view to a track organization point of view, from a playlist point of view. So it's oftentimes that, I don't know what exactly he's referring to. I know that I'm actually so familiar with my template that I almost hardly ever have any confusion, because I'm OCD. I have a problem, and therefore I try and be, even if I don't have time to label stuff or tidy up stuff while I'm running the session, I would definitely take the time later at the end of the session to do it. So at any time I'm working on something that is somehow tidy up. But in situations where you have a lot of tracks, which happens all the time, and maybe you're writing, so you're in the middle of writing and actually putting down takes, I will have two completely different sets of tracks. I'll have the song arrangement on a set of tracks, and then the jamming / writing tracks. So every time, and then with groups and stuff, you can easily switch between the two. So, if let's say there's a band and they're writing, so I'm recording everything they're doing on the bottom set of tracks later in the arrangement, and then at some point they could either go, okay, we're ready to overdub this to the arrangement. So then I go back to the arrangement, disarm all these tracks, arm the track that I need to record, and then go at the top. Or I can take that piece and integrate it back to the original arrangement. I think it all goes down to how familiar you are with your DAW, but also like getting all your preferences right, getting all your colors and stuff ready to go before the session. So at any request that might happen, you're just there, ready to go. You know what I mean? It's all about like a thorough organization. And you might not have a really good template at the beginning, because the template is only good after you tried it on different sessions and kind of implemented things going on. Like your mixing template is only going to get better. Your recording template is only going to get better, because the more you use it, the more you're going to see what you actually need and what you don't need. So you'll make it better, if it makes sense. But in terms of playlists, if you have a lot of playlists, there's something wrong. Usually, if you have 100 takes of something, you're either loop recording something, which then is self-explanatory, or it's a little too crazy. So I try and you know. And maybe the other thing, or this could be helpful, instead of playlisting structure changes, I usually take the whole song, the whole arrangement, copy paste it later in the session, and then do the changes there. So you can always go back to the arrangement without having to like, to remember like what playlist was what and stuff like that. So you have, let's say you have a 5-minute version of a song and you want to shrink it down to 3. You leave the 5-minute version there. Then you copy everything, like every track with the old group, markers, tempo variations, everything, and paste it later in the session, and then work there. You know, and that way you can always go back and forth, and confusion is not.
I assume he was asking for, let's say you've got a vocal take, and you, I mean, maybe you have 40 takes of a lead vocal. I assume probably that's also something that he was asking about.
Well, I mean, if you have 40 takes of a lead, that's it.
Listen.
Cool. Listen, I mean, this is the reality of it. Your brain is not going to remember all the 40 ones, all the 40 takes. So you better get a notepad and actually write down as you listen to them, because your memory can only probably take up to, well, on paper, it can only take up to 3 or 4.
There is a system inside Pro Tools where you can grade your takes, but you can actually just do it on a piece of paper. Let's say you give every take 1 to 10, you know, just a mark, and then you can go through them and just mark like this and just give them like 5, 6, 10, you know, 0, and then basically that way just make sure that you sort of describe the takes, because you know if you're working with that amount of takes, it can be pretty tedious actually.
Also very helpful to write down notes while you do the takes. So when you're recording, you're like, 1, wasn't good. 2, very good, middle 8. 3, verses are good but choruses are pitchy. You know, massively important, because then by the end of it, you kind of visually have your comp ready, if it makes sense. You only have to, you know, to spend the time to put it together, but then you're not just blindly listening to these takes again. You have, your memory is kind of fresh because you've written it down, if it makes sense.
Well, I'm going through the questions, and I think I'm really sorry if I've missed somebody, but you know, I'm just checking quickly on my phone. I don't think there's any more questions, and we're well over the one and a half hour you know, time frame that we were thought, you know, we thought we were going to fit in. So I think that's probably a good moment to wrap up. I mean, it's an Antelope feed. We didn't really talk much about your experience with Antelope's gear, but I guess it's enough to say that you're currently mixing on a Goliath and you've got a Satori monitor controller over there.
Satori over there, yeah, happy with it.
You've got a 10MX in the cupboard, or an atomic clock.
Yeah. I didn't want to show off and then put them out, but yeah. I don't. Yeah, I'm just testing them because of a different project.
But anyway, I really hope this was very useful to everyone who joined us. This obviously will be available on YouTube later on, and I believe also on Facebook, so you can rewatch it. And I don't know, maybe in the future we can do another one. Let's see how things go. But I think this was really good for now. There will be more of these conversations. I'm planning a few more already. At least 2 more are planned already, but I'm sure that there's going to be more of them. And so, you know, follow Antelope, follow Ricky, and thanks so much for taking part of this. And I think that was a really nice conversation. I learned a lot of things myself. So
I learned a lot from you, as always, man, my friend. Thanks to Antelope, obviously, and thanks to you for this, and thanks to everyone that is home locked in. Stay safe, everyone. We're gonna get through this.
Yeah, we're gonna get through this, and we need to be strong for what's coming after. But let's stop there.
Let's make music. That's all we can
make the world a better place. I think that's a good way to end. Yeah. Cheers. Thank you.